Coach Larry, what's going on?
Not much. What's going on with you?
Well, as you saw on Facebook, we asked our runners all the questions that they had about shoes. Let's jump into the first part, terminology. Make us experts, make us sound like we know what we're talking about. Let's just go through the list and you can kind of give a quick definition. Does that sound good?
Perfect. Let's do it.
All right, sick.
Hopefully I know the definitions.
Yeah, I will be quizzing. No, I'm just kidding. Let's start with, foot strike.
It is kind of hard to explain. I guess the easiest way to put it is you think of two main foot strikes when you're running, like a forefoot landing and then like a heel striker. Exactly. And they are exactly what they sound like. Heel striker is when you land on your heel first, and forefoot is kind of like the ball of your foot. Means you're landing on, your forefoot, on the ball of your foot. Or there's also kind of like a midfoot where it's just kind of flat-footed. I'd say those are the 2 to 3 most common types of foot strike.
Gotcha. And what is the most ideal for a runner?
It depends. I feel like we're going to be saying that a lot today. But, heel striking kind of got a bad rep, which I'm sure we'll get into. Mm-hmm. Especially with like the minimalist movement, barefoot running and everything like that, but it's not as bad as it was kind of made out to be.
Ooh, controversial.
Yeah.
We'll get back on that because I have a lot of questions too, because I think from your everyday, like recreational or like even more advanced, but not like elite runners, when they're doing a heel strike, they're more prone to injury, in my opinion, than the elites. Because maybe the cadence is lower, maybe it's like more time on the heel. I don't really know what it is. Maybe you can provide some insight to that, but I've just seen a lot more correlation towards injuries with a lot of runners and heel strikes.
Yeah, and like you said, the heel striking could be like the first part of the, series of events, but it actually could be step 2 or 3 relating to the cadence or where your foot is in relation to your body. That's like increasing the injury, not the heel striking itself. So there's so many different things and like angles you got to take, and it's complicated, complex. And
what did you study in school again?
Kinesiology. So
there we go.
Yeah.
Kind of hard to just blame one thing when everything's connected.
Exactly.
Good insight there. All right. What is a neutral shoe?
So a neutral shoe is what I would say probably kind of the first type of running shoes that come to mind when you think of a running shoe. I guess it would be kind of easier to say first to start with like different foot types and how they kind of match up, quote unquote, with specific shoes. So like,
let's do that.
Typically, people with like higher arches or medium arches go with like a neutral shoe. So they don't like have any like medial postings or guide rails, which a lot of shoe companies are doing now. Medium arch to higher arch people, or people that don't like pronate or overpronate, typically go in a neutral shoe. And then people that, do have more motion, like pronate, which is terminology, kind of like the E version of your ankle, or like the inward rolling of your ankle when you're running. Yep, exactly. So pronation. Supination.
Pronation, supination. That's how we'll remember it.
Available on iTunes.
You're like, I don't need to do that.
Make a song out of it.
Okay, so you're saying that people with medium to high arches should look for most likely a neutral shoe. And those people typically don't pronate or supinate as much as those who would need a stability shoe. Is that correct? So
that's kind of the common thought in the theory, I guess you can say.
Okay.
But yeah, so I know a lot of people get confused with it. Like I was saying, kind of higher arches, they tend to like supinate more. So if you're like arches height, if you have lower arches, they tend to roll in. So, but the theory is people that pronate need more support, and that kind of pronation is bad. And, it really kind of, I was looking at this interesting study that I wrote down. It really kind of got this bad rep, pronation did, in 1978. So 42 years ago, there's a study done in the American Journal in Sports Medicine by James Bates. And that was kind of the first study that kind of linked pronation to like higher injury rates.
Interesting.
So yeah. So I think at that point, that's when a lot of shoe companies, I don't know for sure, I wasn't there, wasn't born yet.
You weren't?
But I wasn't, unfortunately. But yeah, a lot of shoe companies, I think at that point were like, oh shoot, well, let's fix this problem by making these support shoes to help these overpronators, people with pronation, since that study, like I said, was kind of the first thing that linked pronation to like higher injury rates among runners.
Interesting. Did that study also look at supination?
So it did. It didn't only look at pronation. It did look at like training errors and stuff like that. But there was like that little link to pronation and injury rates. So that was kind of like the biggest part. Exactly. Pronation.
Okay. And you're saying that those who have lower arches tend to pronate?
Typically, yes. And first of all, I guess pronation, it's kind of, like I said, got this bad rep because there's all these other outside research studies done by shoe companies, you know, which are saying like, oh, pronation leads to injuries.
Buy my shoe. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, you know, they're trying to sell their product or promote their product, or even a podiatrist. I don't know how many times I've seen runners come in that got a referral from a podiatrist, and they're like, oh, my podiatrist said I need support shoes because I need to stop pronating. And then it's like, you know, I'll watch them walk and they won't be like pronating at all. And I'm like, man, you know, I feel like somebody's really just trying to sell you something, unfortunately.
Wow.
And that happens more, I don't know, more than I could admit, but
Conspiracy.
Exactly. Conspiracy.
That's the thumbnail. Honestly, you put that in a very easy to understand way too, where I feel like once a runner kind of knows what they do, like whether they record themselves, consult, like what I always recommend with like a fit expert like you, once they know what they are, I feel like that's the easiest way to then buy a shoe, because you know what you are and then you can find a shoe that fits. Pun intended. We'll get more into that later. But let's answer a little question about pronation. So, question from our runners. So if you're wearing stability shoes to correct pronation, one of our runners asked about pronating. So would support be good, or would neutral shoes be better because, you know, support may overcorrect the issue?
Yeah, so like I was saying, the idea behind support shoes is that it's going to limit pronation, which was supposedly linked to higher injury rates among runners, but a lot more recent studies can't find that correlation. So I think it was more of like a marketing stunt and just like a sales tactic to, you know, say, oh, you pronate, you need a support shoe. This is going to prevent your injuries. And I want to say too that some people may have had better luck in support shoes than neutral shoes. So I would never say like, oh, support shoes are a waste of money, waste of time. But there's a lot of studies that kind of show they don't do what they claim.
Okay. I feel pretty good now about stability and neutral shoes, pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. Oh, this is a big one. A lot of people ask about this, and I feel like this is just kind of like a buzzword right now, but also with like the max support shoes that we're seeing come out, like the Vaporflies and stuff like that, or like the big cushion. I feel like you're hearing a lot about drop, heel to toe drop, all that kind of stuff. What is drop, Larry? Let us know. Let us in.
Yeah, so this was another thing that people didn't really focus on until like it just made running headlines, I think. You know, around 2008, 2009, there's a couple things that kind of came out. The book Born to Run was a huge influencer on the Barefoot movement. Yeah, so kind of the two main influences that kind of led to this Barefoot movement was the book Born to Run, and also this study that came out, by Dan Lieberman. I believe it was out of Harvard, but he basically showed that when you land more on your heel, impact forces are going to be higher. So, you know, that's kind of, people automatically thought like, oh, higher impact forces means higher rates of injuries. So those two things kind of came together, made this Barefoot movement where everybody's wearing like Vibrams, the toe shoes, which they actually had like a $3.5 million lawsuit that they had to settle.
I remember that.
False claims, yeah. So there was those two things, but that's when like shoe drop kind of came into play. So, you know, the thought was if you had a huge amount of cushion underneath your heel, that it was going to enforce you. Exactly. So something built up in the heel and then like less in the forefoot, like that.
Okay,
Um,
so less in the forefoot, more in the heel.
yeah, that it was going to encourage like a heel strike, which, you know, based off the book, based off of that study, would lead to higher injury rates, was less efficient. And what drop means is like the difference in the amount of cushion underneath your forefoot and the amount of cushion underneath your heel. So if there was, to make it easy, 20 millimeters of cushion underneath your forefoot, underneath your toes,
Mm-hmm.
and then 30 millimeters underneath your heel, that means there's a 10 millimeter drop in the shoe because the difference is 10 millimeters from 20 to 30.
Got it.
So they started, lowering the heel, making that heel to toe drop lower, under 5 millimeters, 4 millimeters was popular for a lot of shoes. Some people wearing the Vibrams and some people actually being barefoot just to get like a zero drop. So there's no difference, in the amount of cushion underneath your forefoot and your heel.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what drop is. And, everybody is like this kind of barefoot running cult that was formed all over the world. I remember this was all going on when I was in high school. And I remember being at a road race sometime in the winter in 2009. Somebody was like running barefoot, not shoes at all. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, like, look at him. He's so whatever. And later that day, I saw a syringe needle like laying on the ground. I'm like, okay, now what if you step on that? Like, yeah.
Right? Oh my gosh. Or you see the very thin sandals.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was like super popular in the book. Just in that regard, not looking at like biomechanics and everything, I think the risk kind of outweighs the reward. You could get an infection from just cutting up your feet for running on the road pretty easily. I mean, they have their side of the argument. Like I said, how it's not going to, you're not going to be landing on your heel, so impact forces are going to be lower. But that study that was done showing that was kind of disproven later. So people automatically assumed that these higher impact forces, because you're landing on your heel, would result in a higher injury rate. But that was later disproved because just because it is a higher impact force doesn't mean it's going to be a higher injury rate, because your body is very smart and it, adapts to the surface it's going to land on. So even though it's going to be landing on like a harder surface or a softer surface, your body is going to adjust its angles, its kinematics appropriately just to absorb that shock and like dissipate that force a little bit better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. Part of me, going back to barefoot running and stuff like that, I kind of think of that whole barefoot movement kind of like the caveman diet, where it was like, go back to our roots, go back to what we ate back in the caveman days. I'm like, yeah, but then technology came and it's easier to be healthier with our diets now. Take out the processed stuff, yes, but technology has helped us. And I think it's also helped us in the running shoe game. But saying that, to your point, marketing is a thing. We all know that. And so I think you just need to be smart as a consumer when you're making the decision of what to buy and not get caught up in the headlines of like heel to toe drop of like,
Exactly.
So there's so many factors, but.
And a lot of people came out of that, trying to switch to like a lower drop or even running barefoot or in Vibrams. They came out of it injured, and podiatrists, were making bank during that time.
Maybe they partnered with Vibram.
Exactly. It could have all
conspiracy.
Yeah, there's going to be some people that swear by it, and that's fine. You have to think like, what if somebody was running 40 miles a week, but they kept getting injured in normal shoes, and then they switched to a barefoot shoe, and then they weren't injured. But, in switching to that barefoot shoe, they had to adapt to it. So they had to cut their miles from 40 to 10 or 20 miles per week. And then they're now all of a sudden claiming that it's barefoot running that made them injury free, but could argue that it's most likely this, reduction in volume and intensity that you're doing that probably is the main contributor to the running injury free.
100%. And on that point, I would recommend, if you want to try barefoot running for whatever reason, drop your mileage down and work your way up. Don't continue with whatever mileage you're at that you're used to with your running shoes, because your body's not used to that impact, especially if you've been wearing very cushioned shoes. So careful.
Yeah. So I would even like say do it in training a little bit, just because there is some benefits. It does strengthen your feet, your lower leg a little bit more. But from a performance and efficiency standpoint, I don't think that there's really an argument to be made, especially anymore when you do look at the Vaporfly. People aren't setting world records in, barefoot shoes. They're setting world records in these Maximalist cushion Vaporfly shoes.
What is the drop, the heel to toe drop in the Vaporflies?
It was a 10 in the 4%, and then they moved it to an 8.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, what does that 2% reduction do?
Yeah,
Anything
I know.
big?
Probably not.
10 seconds off your 5. No, I'm just kidding. Your
10
marathon time. 10 seconds. Okay. Wow. Mind blown.
10 to 12, 8
10
to
to
12,
12.
I should say, is like super common among shoes. For a while, a lot of shoe companies were releasing models that were like 4 or so, like Saucony with the Ginvara, which was a super popular shoe, and it came out, right around 2009 or 10. And yeah, there's this pendulum that swung to barefoot, running shoes, and now it kind of swung back to like highly cushioned Hoka, softness is the way to go.
What's going to be the running shoe in 2030?
Exactly. We could be running in cycling shoes then. Like, who knows what it's going to be? Flippers.
Like cleats for like marathon?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Okay. So I think we kind of answered this question already, but when you hear the buzzwords maximalist and minimalist, what can you think of in your head?
So the most popular brand that's kind of doing well with minimalist shoes still is Ultra. They have a 0 heel to toe drop, so your heel, your forefoot have the same amount of cushion under them. Even though it's a minimalist brand, they're still putting a lot of cushion underneath the shoe. But I guess the side of it that's minimalist is that it's just flat, but still cushioned for some of their models. And then Maximalist, the main thing people think of is Hoka, which, just has the crazy stack heights. Yep, exactly. Freaking Gene Simmons shoes or Spice Girl shoes, whatever you're going to call them. And that's the brand that so many people come into the running store I work at, and they're like, hey, do you have hookahs? Or I had one lady come in, she's like, yeah, do you sell honks here? And I'm like, oh, man.
You're like, yes, we do.
We got honks right here. Yeah.
Wait, show your pair right now. You just got a really cool pair.
Yeah, we got a free pair of these. This is the new Clifton Edge.
Dang,
so Hoka, I am a fan of Hoka. I'm a fan of cushion. They did a really good job of providing cushion, but not making the shoe just feel like a brick and being super heavy. So Hoka shoes are surprisingly light for how big and bulky they feel. A lot of people look at them and they're like, nope, won't try that on. Not even getting into chance. And that's understood. You're like that?
Well, now I'm kind of looking at some models and a lot of runners are wearing Hokas. And so I'm like, maybe I'll consider a pair for a trail shoe or something. But yeah, in the past I was like,
I think not. Yeah. Got to change the height on your driver's license when you put a pair of Hokas on.
You're like, I'm sorry, this isn't you. I'm like, I'm wearing my Hokas. Wait, can you describe those Hokas? So are those stability? What is the heel to toe drop? All that good stuff.
So Hoka, they came out. It was kind of shocking. They began their company right, when the barefoot movement. Sorry, I thought you could see him. I got him sitting here. Right when the barefoot movement was in full swing. So it was pretty risky to release this company that was the exact opposite of what research was saying, the market was saying, what consumers wanted at the time. So it took a few years for them to take off, but they did kind of have, and they still do have some qualities from the barefoot movement. They do actually have a lower heel to toe drop. Most of them are 5 to 4 millimeters of difference. And like I said, most shoes are 8 to 12. So it has that, but it does have a ton of cushion underneath your foot. They do have stability shoes. They do have neutral shoes. The ones that I prefer are kind of their lighter weight options. So like the Clifton Edge here. And then the normal Clifton is like a good go-to neutral kind of lighter weight shoe.
You're making me want to try out Hoka. I'm so inspired.
Yeah. Some of those things, like, you have to. Like, got to try it.
Mike Wardian wears Hoka, so I will wear Hoka. No, I'm just kidding.
I wear Hoka. That's the secret.
That's a secret. Let's talk about more buzzwords. Cross trainers, trail shoes, walking shoes. What are the differences?
Yeah, kind of a harder question to answer, especially with the walking shoes, because so many people just use like the running shoes or running shoes for walking shoes. Same thing with like cross training shoes. One brand that does really well with cross training, CrossFit, is Innovate. They give like a little bit more lateral support to their shoes. On is a super popular, growing brand, I should say. They do really well for other activities besides just running, and they're just designed a little bit different. The upper a little bit more supportive on the lateral side. Trail shoes just a little bit heavier duty, better traction.
Better traction. Oh, I wish I had mine right now. That's a good point. I think on the bottoms you can kind of tell because you're not going to slide when you're on dirt and surfaces where, you know, on the road you don't necessarily need that traction.
Yeah,
So it makes sense
they're
to me.
definitely more aggressive on the bottom, almost like lugs kind of underneath. Yeah. So then walking shoe, you know, it's hard to say.
Could you wear, this is one of our questions that we're going to get into. So let's say I have one pair of running shoes that I've been using for my marathon training, which we'll talk about later too, like multiple shoes. Is that a thing? And let's say I want to go on a walk. Is it okay to wear that pair of running shoes that I'm using in my training for like a 2-3 mile walk?
Yeah. So it's funny because you ask most hardcore runners and their first response is no.
That's
Running
what I
shoes are
say.
only for running. Yeah, see, you're a hardcore runner.
I mean,
But
I don't
yeah,
want to
so
mile them out, you know?
exactly. So they are going to wear out faster, of course, if you're walking in them. But then, you know, what if the other shoes that you have are like extremely crappy and run down and stuff? So it's like, why be uncomfortable in your walk? You know, if you just wear your running shoes to walk in and you could be comfortable all the time. It's like, I think that'd be better for you in the long run.
That makes sense. Because I
Yeah, so
always wear my miled out shoes when I go on walks, and it's like, well, that's probably not good for my body either. If
yeah.
anything, get another pair of running shoes and use them for walks.
Yeah. I mean, I do the same thing as you. It'd be better, of course, to have like newer shoes. But yeah, as soon as one is done, I'm like, all right, time. These are my kick around shoes now.
Totally. Something that we can touch on a little bit more. Talking about different kinds of shoes, I feel like you see a lot of runners get into running with their Nike Frees and shoes that are more kind of like athleisure that are not going to be good for running. Can you kind of talk about why that's the case?
Yeah, that's another athleisure. Did you make that up? That sounds legit.
Yes, I made that up. No, I'm just kidding. I'll take credit though, but no, I did not.
A lot of people come into the running store I work at and they're like, yeah, I always heard Nike was, you know, bad running shoes. And it's like, that's, you know, not the case, but they make so many shoes that you could just go pull off a shelf and start running in. Yeah, that's probably not the best thing for you if you got it from Foot Locker or Champs or something. You know, there's going to be some cheaper shoes that some people can run in totally fine and like not have any injuries, anything like that. And, you know, at that point, it's hard to say, well, you'd be better in a, you know, $150 pair of shoes as opposed to that $50 one if there's nothing wrong with them to begin with. So, I mean, I'd always recommend, you know, getting a good shoe. You know, just the materials they're made of is going to be a little bit better, higher quality. They should last a little bit longer. But once again, everybody's different.
I mean, Hokas are just like classically ginormous.
Hey, sorry.
Oh, good. Sorry, my nose ring is like doing some weird things right now.